Good morning. Thank you very much, and thank you to the chair, and thank you very much to the organizing committee to invite me to give this talk about consumer preference, behavior, and perception about meat and meat products. Just to start, I just say that, as all of you know, meat and meat products are an important source of protein in the human diets. And the quality of the meat and the meat products depend on a lot of different intrinsic and extrinsic factors that sometimes can be shaped to obtain the desired product in order to satisfy the consumer demands. The consumption depends on several factors. For instance, it depends, we are going to see some of them today, and also is not the same in all the countries and in the regions. If we have a look, this is a very general look of the meat consumption in, in the world by continent. If we have a consumption of beef, of mutton, of pork, poultry, and other meats in kilos per capita a year, we can see that the shape of the plot is very different depending on the continent. And also, if we can look at the country, this is also different between countries. For instance, in Muslim countries, pork consumption is low or absent, while in other countries, like for instance, some European countries like Germany, Austria, Lithuania, etc., the consumption is around 50 kilos per capita a year. But what we are going to talk today is what affects the consumer behavior toward these meat and meat products. I'm going to structure the talk in 3 different blocks. In the first block, I'm going to speak about the psychological factors that influence the consumer behavior, the attitude and beliefs and expectations mainly, but also there are factors like risk, sociocultural effect, lifestyle, and values. Then there are sensory factors which affect the consumer behavior, like visual appearance, in-mouth texture, flavor, and other. And there are also some marketing factors like price, label, brand, and availability. All these factors are related in turn and affect each other. For instance, a marketing factor such as price may affect the expectation a consumer has about the product. If the price is high, maybe I perceive that my expectation is better for this product than if the price is low. Or in this marketing factor, price can also affect the sensory factors. Because if it's high price, I taste it, I'm sure it's better. It's very good because it's very expensive. So there is influence relation between all these factors. Just say that the psychological factors can be considered within individual factors. Sensory factors are product-specific factors, and marketing factors are environmental factors. This is the distribution we did to prepare this talk. It's a very wide issue. There are a lot of things to talk about, and probably there are other factors that are not included here. For instance, neophilia, neophobia, which we are not going to talk about, and others which are not here. But we need to choose some of them, and this was the selection. So let's start with the psychological factors. I will center the talk in 2 of them, attitudes and belief for one side, and expectation for another one. External inputs can modulate the consumer cognitive, emotional, volitional, and by contrast, automatic actions. These ones also modify and influence in the motivation, perception, attitudes, and expectations. And these drive our ordinary life and make individual conduct predictable from a social, economic, cultural, and psychological perspective. If we start with belief, a definition of belief is the information that a person possesses about an object, action, or event that can be therefore linked to some attribute. Beliefs can be conceptualized as cognition, and they represent the individual perception of the relationship between the given object, action, or event, and the attributes associated with them. Beliefs are, formation is a lifelong dynamic process, and they can be developed by means of direct observation, so the experience, what I experience when I evaluate, when I taste a product, an object. By information, this is the information I receive from outside source, either a familiar relative, some friends, the doctor, the mass media, etc. And by inference, so inferentials between my previous experience and my knowledge. For instance, I know by experience that if I eat meat with a higher amount of fat, meat tastes better, the taste is better. I know that by experience. But information that I receive is the fat is not good for health. So I can infer that this meat that tastes better because it has a higher fat content is not good for my health. That's done. Then, regarding attitudes, attitudes in this case, in contrast with beliefs, are the personal feeling toward an evaluation of an object, person, issue, or event. And the nature of the attitudes are affective and evaluative. The affective component tends to have a stronger effect in the risk perception and acceptance than the cognitive one. For instance, I like a product, but even I like it, if I receive bad information of there is by means of boycott, for instance, against this product, probably I don't feel good this product after all. Okay. Attitudes and belief about characteristics of a certain product and the way it is produced, handled, and distributed affect at the perception of the consumers. In general, attitudes and beliefs tend to be positive if they are similar to the own behavior of the consumer, and they tend to be negative if they are different from their own behavior. And centering attitudes and beliefs regarding meat and meat products, they are mainly influenced by the product itself and by the individual's characteristics, and they are measurable, variable, affect the personal emotions and behaviors. Generally speaking, and regardless of its traditional character, and let's just say that meat is very good, it's an important source of protein, and it's a very good product to eat, but for a certain person of population, meat tends to have a negative image. It can be due to different factors. For instance, its association with a live animal, the handling practices, the slaughter conditions, the presence of blood, environmental issues, health issues, religious, ideological, ethical, or moral concern. But even this negative image, there is a limited effect on shopping behavior, probably because of the low consumer knowledge that tend to be based on indirect sources. Also, even these negative attitudes, they are not associated with a reduction of meat consumption, but in change of the role assigned to meat within a meal. For instance, considering meat as an ingredient of the meal instead of the highly valued part of this meal. And although general public claims to be concerned about these issues, such as animal welfare, for instance, and they strongly believe that it should be assured and guaranteed, then in some cases, some consumers do not tend to think about that when they buy a product and when they eat the meat. This behavior might emerge as a result of a psychoprotective mechanism, which is now directed or intentional forgetting. I'll try to explain it. Personal well-being and life satisfaction is equivalent to the happiness of a person, of a consumer. We have some experiences. These experiences can be positive or can be negative experience. In general, positive experiences are going to increase my well-being, I'm going to increase my happiness. And we could say that negative experiences are going to decrease my happiness. But there is a psychological protective mechanism that de-emphasize the threatening and unpleasant experiences consciously or unconsciously, and it makes that the favorable experiences are forgotten, and the happiness is not decreasing but remains constant. This, such forgetting is an explanation, can help to explain in part, partly only, the apparent discrepancy between the attitudes toward meat and meat products and their consumption. Okay. Now I'm going to start with the expectations. Expectations is a group of feelings or beliefs inherent to humans concerning the likelihood that something will happen in a certain way or that the product will have certain characteristics. Sorry. This product is going to be bad, this product is going to be good. Everybody has expectation for something in the daily life that affect the personal reactions and decisions. And because of that, they are very important because they may alter the perception and an image of a product even before its test of occurrence. Perceptions imply anticipations and some degree of rational thinking, and they are subjective by nature. In general, higher expectations are related with higher requirements and higher exigencies for a product. And this consequently has a higher likelihood to have a higher dissatisfaction and disappointment. Expectations, the formation expectation process starts with the prior expectations we have. These prior expectations, together with some informational cues that we receive at the shopping place, for instance, the product itself, the appearance, the context, the package, the label, the adverts, etc., they help to create new expectations. If these new expectations are low, probably we are going to reject the product. If these new expectations are high, probably we are going to purchase this product. If we purchase them and we taste them, we have the experience. And we can find two different situations. The first of one is that the experience and the expectation is the same as the expectation, so the expectation is confirmed. And the second one is when expectation is not confirmed, so experience is better or lower than the expectation. In this case of this confirmation, there are several theories, several models that explain the attitude of the consumer towards that. For instance, if the expectative is higher than the experience, the perception of the product I have in blind conditions, the most usual, the most common theory is the assimilation theory, which is known also as cognitive dissonance. And it says that in order to diminish this mental discomfort created by the unconfirmed expectation, any discrepancy between the expectation and the perception of the product is going to be diminished or assimilated by the consumer. So, the way to do it is the consumer will bring the perception of the product closer in the line as the expectation. So in this case, experience was low, the perception was low, and consumer bring it higher in order to be closer to what he expected. This is the assimilation theory. Another theory is the contrast, in which if the experience is lower than the expectation, then it will be even lower by contrast. Another theory is the generalized negativity, in which if the experience is not the same as the expectation, then it's not good, it's bad, just negative. And in between assimilation and contrast, there are different possibilities of consumer perception of this product. The same situation can be found when the product is better than expected. By assimilation in this case, by assimilation in this case, the perception is higher than the expectation, so it's going to decrease a little bit to bring this experience closer to the expectation. By contrast, if its expectation is lower and blind is higher, it will be by contrast even higher. Negative is the same. It's not what I expected, so even if it's better, it's not good, because it's not what I expected, it's the negative situation. And in between assimilation and contrast, there are different possibilities in consumers' reactions. Okay. Regarding meat and meat products, the creation of expectations sometimes is difficult for the consumer, because looking at the meat sometimes it's difficult to know if it's good or it's not good, and consumers create this expectation using some characteristics of the meat, some intrinsic characteristic of the meat, like appearance or color, etc. We are going to talk about that later on. And to some, for instance, information that comes through the labeling, for instance, through the label, for instance, the price. But not always there is a good relation between these characteristics and the eating quality of the meat. And that's why there are some works that show that consumers use additional information that comes from the butchers or the person that sells the meat at the point of purchase, because they consider this person the expert and those that know that the product is going to be good or not. Moreover, the expectations of the meat and meat quality by the consumers are influenced, depend on the type of product and the context in which they are going to be consumed. For instance, if I have a dry-cured ham, I expect from Iberian pig, which is a high-quality dry-cured ham, I expect that the fat is going to be melted in my mouth when I eat it, because it's a characteristic of this type of ham. But I don't look at the melting of the fat if I buy a salami, because it's not typical here. Moreover, if I buy a salami, it's not the same if I eat the salami in a canapé in a social event, or if I eat a salami as ingredient of a pizza. The concept is very different. Okay. Now we have finished overview about psychological factors. I'm going to start in sensory factors, and I will speak with these four that are here: visual appearance, in-mouth texture, flavor, and odor. These sensory factors are affected by a lot of intrinsic and extrinsic factors, parameters, like the genetic, the production type, the feeding, the sex, the extraction, the stress, the slaughter, the weight, etc. All these factors, at the same time, sensory factors at the same time are also affected by post-mortem factors, like the electrical stimulation, the carcass hanging, the aging time, the packaging, the cooling process, etc. Just say that depending on the factor, on the parameter of the attribute, the sensory attribute, there are some parameters that affect most than others. But it's not the objective of the talk to talk about that, just to say that, yes, there is a high influence of these factors. If we start with visual appearance, we can see here, if we look at the meat, at the same product, loin, sticks, whatever, we can find visually they can be completely different. It's very different, it's very different. We can find completely different situations. This is what consumers see the first time when they go at the point of purchase. And that appearance, that visual appearance, affected the expectation for the meat quality and at the choice of the consumer at the point of purchase. One of the most important visual appearance parameters is the color, because the color is related with the different forms of the sarcoplasmatic protein myoglobin, and it's related with the freshness of the meat, and is used for the consumers to predict meat quality, although it's not always related with it. If we have these two sticks, well, the color, I don't know if you can appreciate it, but which one are you going to choose? Probably most of you are going to choose the first one, because it's a red color. The other one is a brown color. And in general, red color is related with freshness and brown color with lack of freshness. But if I have these two, one is a little bit dark, the other one is light, maybe we can find different opinions among the audience. There is a work that they did in pork loins It was an international work in which they compare the different parameters of the pork and how consumers choose the pork according to these parameters. One of the parameters is the dark color, and here I give the percentage of consumers that select pork chop color. Cannot distinguish a lot the color, but the first one is the dark pork, and the second one is the light pork. We can see that some countries like Japan, Taiwan, China, and Brazil, the percentage that consumers that prefer the dark pork is higher than those that prefer the light pork. In other countries like Ireland, Poland, Canada, Australia, and Argentina, the percentage of consumers that prefer the light pork is higher than those that prefer the dark one. While in other countries, there is, like USA, France, South Africa, there is a similar percentage of consumers that prefer both types of porks. But what we can see is that in all the countries, there are consumers that prefer one type and another. And moreover, if we segment these consumers, we also can find that these segments of consumers within countries can be distinguished with all types of possibilities. Just say that this work was also done in a lot of other countries, but I have not commented all the results, just some of them. Regarding beef, in general, the light-colored beef is preferred to the dark one. We can find works that say that the red beef is the preferred. In other works, they distinguish between the bright red compared with the pale red beef. In other words, they talk about bright cherry red compared with dark red beef. Others, they say that the red but not bright, or red but not dark, or intense red but not dark. So in general it's red, but the intensity of the tonality can change, and it depends on the words you use to describe them too. There is one work in lamb. As you know, color is related with the instrumental color. And there is one work in lamb that they evaluate the consumer acceptability of the color, and they relate it with the color parameters, instrumental color parameters in the CLAB. That's the lightness and the redness, which is the A. And they saw that, yes, consumers' acceptability of lamb color is related with the lightness, but is more important the acceptability and the relation it has with the redness. So it seems that red is more important than the light or dark color. Regarding meat products, like dry-cured ham, color is also important. And, for instance, problems of iridescence that are typical in these products are not appreciated by consumers. Just say that in order to improve the color stability, there are methods to increase the shelf life and the time meat, and the time that the meat will be accepted by the consumers at the point of purchase. And, for instance, it can be done in live animals by feeding antioxidants in packaged products, packaging in atmosphere modified, or adding antioxidant, for instance, in ground meat or minced meat. Another important visual appearance parameter is the fat content. If we look at these two pork loins or these two lamb loins, the fat content is very different. In general, the lean pork is preferred to the fatter one, except in some countries, like Japan and South Korea, according to this international work I have talked about. But what is true that in general, there is a higher preference of consumers for leaner meat, either lamb, beef, or pork. And this has produced it has been done. So in general, the lean of the fat pork and lamb has been increased in the different countries, in the different production systems. And this has been done by means of genetics, by means of feeding, changing in feeding, or feeding strategies, etc. And just say that in general, not always, but in general, this increase in the lean content has produced a reduction in the eating quality of the meat. Just is a thing that we have to think about. If we have, we are going to talk another parameter, which is marbling, which is related with the fat, but it's the intramuscular fat, the fat that we can see, or the marbling, which is the visible part of the intramuscular fat. I don't know if we can see it very well here. No sé. Well, this is the lean loin. This is a marbled loin. I don't know if within the audience who's going to choose the lean loin. Who would buy this one if we go with the point of purchase? Hands up. Not a lot? Okay. And who would buy the fat one? So, well, in general, you are meat scientists, so you know that the fatter is better. But in general, we can find more or less half and a half, or that depends on the audience. But we can find consumers that prefer the lean one and consumers that prefer the fat one. So, but if I show you this one, who's going to choose this one? Hands up? Nobody? One? No more. That's because this is extremely fat. But if I say that this is from Iberian pork, and this is a fat of high quality fat with a high oleic acid, maybe some of you are saying, okay, I'm going to choose it. Or if you are in a context in which you need, you are thinking about fatty products, maybe you are also going to choose it. In fact, the context may affect, if I buy bacon, I am buying a very fatty product. So it's a possibility of market of these products, because in some contexts it's possible to have them. But we did a study in which consumer, we cannot appreciate it a lot in the image, but they evaluate pork loin with low, very lean loin, these two ones, and very marbled loin, these two ones. According to the choice of the consumers, we found that some consumers, like here, prefer the lean one, and some others prefer the fat one. Then, after that, we give the loins to the consumers in blind conditions. And what we found was that all the consumers, the lean loin lovers and the marbled loin lovers, prefer the most the marbled loin in comparison with the leaner loin. So in this case, for the lean lovers, there is a disconfirmation, a disagreement between the expected and experienced, while in the loin lovers, in the lean lovers, is not a disconfirmation. And in this case, we could conclude that the higher marbling decreased the eating quality. However, there are other works that this effect is not as clear as here. In beef, there is also some works regarding the marbling. There is one work in which classify consumers in those that like the low marbling sticks and those that like the high marbling sticks. And what they saw, it was that the consumers, looking at the willingness to pay, that consumers that like the low marbling sticks, they were willingness to pay more for low marbled stick. And those that like the high marbling, they willingness to pay more for the high marbled. So in the market, we can find both types of consumers. And the last appearance parameter I'm going to speak, and very, very short, is the drip loss. I'm sure that if I ask you to say which one do you prefer, all of you are going to choose this one, because the drip in general is not nice, and also economically is very bad. It can produce higher economical losses. The drip loss, so we can say that in general, higher drip is lower preferences, and drip loss is affected at the entire carcass, but also it's very visible to the consumers in the packed meat. So some strategies to reduce this drip loss in packed meat have been done, like minimizing temperature fluctuation, anti-fog properties of film. I don't enter on that, just say that we need to work also more on that, because it's a very important parameter. Finishing the visual appearance parameters, I will start with the in-mouth texture. In-mouth texture is a multi-parameter sensory attribute, and the most studied are the tenderness and the juiciness. And what we can say is that higher tenderness and juiciness imply a higher consumer preferences, higher experienced quality, higher intention to purchase, and higher willingness to pay. The tenderness is affected with a lot of parameters, as we have seen at the beginning. For instance, some work shows that in beef, more aged is more tender. In lamb, for instance, that there is a higher preferences for tenderness of light and concentrate lamb in comparison with grass-fed lamb and heavy lamb. And there is a higher tenderness in pork from gills than castrated male. One of the methods to measure one part of the tenderness, not all of them, the tenderness, but not all of the tenderness and not all the texture, is some texturometer. And there are some works in which they give an instrumental threshold for tenderness. So between this value, we can say that this meat is going to be too much tough or or tender enough. But what is clear is that post-mortem factors are crucial in determining the tenderness, and if those factors are not optimized, the in vivo strategies are useless. So although the consumer buy a meat that is going to be potentially tender, if the cooking procedure and the way they keep it in the refrigerator, etc., is not good, this meat is going to be very tough. So maybe we need some education to the consumers to show them how they need to prepare the meat to be more tender. Then regarding dry cured ham, texture is also an important attribute that affected the purchase, and not only the tenderness and juiciness. In dry cured ham, there are some problems of excessive softness and pastiness and crust formation at the surface that they produce a reduction of the consumer acceptance of the product. Thus, we need to improve the production process in order to reduce these problems in the final product. Another important sensory factor is the flavor. The flavor is a very complex characteristics of the meat, is a very complex one. And we can say that the raw meat, which is in good conditions, has a bloody taste and very little aroma. So the flavor is formed mainly while cooking the meat, while treating it thermically. Because the lipids and water-soluble components form different volatile compounds by means of lipid degradation, Maillard reaction, and reactions between their products. And these volatile compounds are the responsible of the flavor. And the alterations during storage and serving conditions can affect the flavor. We can say that to define the flavor, we use a lot of different attributes. Sometimes they are clear, there are references for them. Sometimes they are not very clear, and it's difficult to define them and difficult that consumers consider the same attribute for the same flavor characteristic. But what it is clear is that the flavor enjoyment is related with the overall experience of the meat and affects at the consumer satisfaction in fresh and processed meat. Flavor is affected by a lot of different factors, but one of the most important is the feeding. The flavor of the grass-fed animals is different, of the meat from grass-fed animals is different from those of concentrate-fed animals, mainly because of the fatty acid composition, which in grass-fed animals has higher omega-3 components in form of alpha-linolenic, basically. And just to say that there are a lot of different consumers' preferences for flavor, and there are some works that segmented consumers according to its flavor preferences. For instance, in lamb, there is one work that separates consumers in two groups, the milk or concentrate taste lovers and the grass taste lovers. And in beef, for instance, another work that separates consumers in the taste or local beef lovers and taste of foreign beef lovers. And this is going to happen because we don't have homogeneity among consumers. Regarding pork, just a quick look over pork. Some work show that the fried flavor is preferred to the boiled and sour flavors. And one important problem in pork is the bourdain, which is related with the sex of the animal. And entire males can have bourdain problems, which is taste related, which reminds the urine and the manure, because it's related with androstenone and skatol levels, mainly. And it depends on the sensitivity of the consumers. And of course, it's not important only in fresh meat, it also affects the meat products. And regarding dry cured ham, there are preferences for age, flavor, smell, and salty taste. And this can be modified through the processing process. And just to finish, I will do a quick overview on marketing factors. Marketing factors on the information that reach consumers about meat and meat products. It comes from adverts, informational campaigns, label or brands. And this information, together with other factors, can influence in the expectation the consumer has against this product. And of course, it influences at the choice of the product, at the purchasing decision, and at the willingness to pay. In order to increase the sales or to reach a specific market, there are some marketing strategies like online shops, telemarketing, or direct selling that will help to get this objective. One of the marketing factors which is important is the price, which affects the expected quality. And there are different results in which compare different parameters, price with other parameters. Depending on these parameters, the importance of the price is higher or is lower. There is, for instance, in general, the low price is preferred, either because a segment of consumers with low purchasing power prefer this meat, of course, and because some consumers are not, for them, meat characteristics and type are not important. So they prefer the low price. There is one work in beef that shows that the preference is lower as the discount on the price increase. And they explain that probably because a consumer, if thinks that is a high discount, it thinks that is not good, probably because it's close to the expiration date. And also, it's important to know that the price can change the consumer habits of some people, because if they cannot afford a type of meat, probably they are going to buy another meat which is more affordable. For instance, in some countries, like in Spain, lamb is very expensive, and so people with economical problems, probably they cannot buy lamb every week or as often as they would, and they have to replace lamb by other meats. Then the quality labeling, it's important, and it comes, especially the certification labeling, because it can affect the consumer preferences, either in one way or another. If the organism that do the certification, consumer trust in them, they are going to affect positivity. But in some countries, the consumer don't distrust in the organism that do the certification. And in this case, they prefer the consumer advice than the certification. Some works show that in beef, the certification is used to infer the meat quality, and it is also a quality signaling beef healthiness. One of the certification is the denomination of origin or a protected indication or geographical indication. And this is related with the country of origin, which is an important marketing parameter that can affect the consumer purchase. And in general, consumer has preferences for national beef and lamb, and between the lamb, they prefer the high lamb over the low lamb. Local products in general are preferred because they are fresher, tastier, and high quality, and also because of ethnocentrism aspect. And that also depends on the countries. This is higher in more developed countries. Thus, because of that, it's important to develop marketing strategies that value the proximity product. One specific case of certification is the halal meat. The halal meat is, the certification of halal meat is very important, especially for Muslims that live in non-Muslim countries, because it's an assure of halal authenticity and also is related with meal wholesomeness. Also, the halal certification has higher importance in young and more acculturated females, which are willing to pay more for this certified halal meat. And the last aspect is the organic production. Organic production, like the information about organic production reaches consumers through certification mainly. And also the standards for organic production are different depending on the countries. We can say that in general, In general, consumers consider organic products with some specific characteristics of management, nutrition, food safety, health, environmental friendly, and ethics. In general, the willingness to pay depends on the type of certification and the country and region. And for instance, there is a work in one case in pork, in which they saw that consumers had higher expectation and willingness to pay towards organic and free-range pork. But when they evaluated, when they tasted, the experienced quality was lower. And this was related because probably this meat is less tender due to high physical activity of these animals. Organic production, in general, also the perception of organic beef is higher equal to the conventional one, in general. And this is probably because of the type of the grass feeding which affected the flavor in compared with the concentrate one. And there is, in general, there is a high expected liking with conventional beef. But we know that organic production is costly, and due to that is oriented to a specific segment of consumers, region or lifestyle. The segments of consumers, we can find some segments of consumers that are willing to pay for this organic meat. But the amount are willing to pay, I have found two works in which one is between 14 and 21% and the other is only 5%. So there are differences on that. And the last one is I'm going to show a work we did in which we use different marketing factors. We did a conjoined study in Germany, France, United Kingdom, and Spain, in which we give labels of a lamb product, in which we change the country of origin, which could be Uruguay, Argentina, Switzerland, and the local one, so Germany, France, United Kingdom, Spain, and the feeding, which can be a grass-fed, concentrate feed, and grass plus concentrate feed feeding. Also, we change the price, low, medium, and high. The results of this work show that in global, the origin was the most important factor which affected the consumer purchase of this product. But we could find three clusters of consumers. The first one, the cluster influenced by the origin. A second cluster influenced mainly by the feeding. And a third one influenced mainly by the price. If we look at within all these groups, we can see that the preference for the origin was the local one in all the groups. The preference for the feeding was the grass feeding in all the groups. In this one, grass was very close to the concentrate plus grass feeding. And the preferences for the price was low in all the groups. In this one was low together with medium, but it was low almost everywhere. But then consumers evaluate this meat in blind conditions, and this was the result. In general, the grass-fed lamb has lower acceptability scores in comparison with the concentrate or grass plus concentrate lamb. Probably because of the strange, sometimes grass-fed lamb has a strange flavor due to the feeding, which can be due to different factors, and that can influence. So these consumers are going to have this confirmation. And that's all. Just I brought conclusions, but in fact it's just some final remarks to say that the consumer perception and behavior and preferences are heterogeneous. There are multiple determinants that shape consumer behavior toward meat and meat products. A better understanding of this complexity may help to improve the competitiveness of the meat industry. There is more information about meat and meat products that could create more accurate expectations. And cultivating positive attitudes and ensuring satisfaction of consumer expectations should increase competitiveness of meat and meat products and their market share over alternative sources of protein. And I like one sentence that says that, yes, homogeneity is very good, all is very easy, but variety is the spice of life. And this is what we can find in the consumer's perception and behavior. And that's all. Thank you for your attention.